2 weeks. What that means is that all of the lecture material, all the new material and content will be available on Ed as Ed lessons, and in class here will be reserved more for discussion, some practice problems, and answering questions. So let me go ahead and share my screen. Okay, and now everybody should be seeing the lessons, is that right? Okay, cool. So again, here in Ed, if you go to lessons, you'll see here I have lecture 7, or lecture 7 Skittles, and then today's new lecture. Again, there are videos and some practice problems here. I just want to remind everyone that nothing in these Ed lessons, none of the practice problems, and none of the Skittles examples that we're going to be going over are for a grade. This is all just practice. None of this is actually graded. So some quick reminders before we get into the material for today. Homework 1 is due tonight by 11 p.m. And CP2, which is out, although not out of this world like homework 1, it's available for you guys to work on, and that is due next Wednesday. I did want to also make some other quick announcements. We love that you guys are asking tons of questions on Ed. That's really awesome. And Tal and Connor and others have been super responsive to your questions, I know. However, we'd like to ask that if possible, you provide as much information along with your question as possible. We're getting quite overloaded with a lot of questions that are just screenshots of failed tests asking what is wrong. So if possible, if you could tell us what you've tried, give us some more context, that would be helpful. If you have a ton of tests and you just blanket the screen with that, it's really hard for the TAs and the instructors to help you. And in those cases, if you're really feeling a little lost about what's going on, I really suggest you go to WPL hours and get help there. I think that's all I have for announcements. So I know I already posted videos going over creating, adding, and removing elements, and also moving elements around. Just for everyone's sake, because I know that that was just posted yesterday evening, I'm going to walk through these slides very quickly. I'm not going to do them justice. Please, when you have an opportunity, go check out the videos and answer the practice problems. Okay, so we already knew how to access currently existing HTML elements on our page with query selector, get element by ID. But if we want to create new ones dynamically, we can use this create element function. We can pass in the name of the tag. For example here, we can pass in the string h2 to create element, and this creates a new empty h2 element. But this is not actually part of the DOM. It won't display, and is actually not accessible via query selector all. We need to add this new element to the page. In order to do that, we can use these functions that are provided on HTML elements. Appendchild is one of the most classic examples. If parent node is the element that we want to add our new element to, we would call parent node.appendchild and pass in our new HTML element, and then that new element would then be a part of our DOM. Now, I know some people might be confused about the difference between element and node. All HTML elements are a type of node. There are multiple types of nodes, but everything we're going to be working with is going to be an element. And so everything we create with create element will be an element, and we'll have all of these functions available on our HTML elements to use to place them on the DOM. Now, just as easily as we can append a node to the DOM, we can also remove it using remove child, and that has the exact same function signature. Another way of removing an element is just by calling its remove function. This can be easier if you don't have a reference to the parent element, or if you don't want to use this nice property parent element and then call remove child on your element. It seems a little unnecessary to do this, so you can just call remove on an element to remove it from the DOM. Up to you which one you want to use. Either is fine. Okay, and as I said, if you're using the JavaScript template, we have a nice alias function here for document.createElement. So these same functions that we can use to append elements to the page, to add them to our DOM, can actually be used to move elements around the page as well. This doesn't only apply to elements that haven't been added to the DOM yet. So if you use parent node.appendchild on your element, it will actually move it from its current location and add it to the end of that container. And then here we have some additional properties on our HTML elements that allow us to traverse the DOM, meaning we could actually access every element on the page with these properties, but these give us access to elements around our current HTML element. So I can get the children elements of my HTML element. I can get siblings, which are at the same level in the HTML tree. I can get my parent element, the node that contains my element. And so these are really nice handy functions or properties for accessing nearby HTML elements. And so here we have just a quick example that I didn't go over in the video. So maybe we can just do this really quickly. On the left-hand side is an example HTML. That has a wrapper with an ID of container, and then two children divs with column 1 and 2 as IDs, and then each one contains 3 divs. So for example here, what would ID container.children give us? What would the result of that property be? If anybody wants to answer. Exactly, right. So we would just get columns 1 and 2. And then the next one here, if we did ID column 1 dot first element child, what would that give us? Right, that would give us the first div here in our column. So I think you guys get the idea. For example, for box 2, if we did next element sibling, this would give us div 3. If we were to do box 2 dot previous element sibling, that would have given us div 1 again. So these are really nice properties to access nearby HTML elements. Okay, well, we are going to go ahead and jump back over to our Skittles example that we've been working on. If you go into into the lessons, I have updated the code from last time from where we ended off. So everybody's starting at the same point. So if you go into lecture 8 Skittles here, we'll all be starting with the same code. Just quickly, though, I do want to remind everybody what we're sort of working towards. When I hit start on this game, I populate this jar with Skittles of different colors, random numbers, and we want to guess the number of Skittles of the red color in here. And every time I reset, I might get a different color that I need to guess. Now, we are going to be doing a subset of this functionality as we work up to that final product. And so today, what we're really going to be working on is what is pictured here. So when I hit start, I want to add elements, Skittles into the jar. And when I hit give me the answer, I want to get how many green Skittles are in this jar. We've already done the give me the answer part. So we're going to move on to add this functionality of adding Skittles to our jar. And then we're actually going to keep adding on to that with a little more behavior than is pictured here. And that may take up the whole time. It may not. So we'll see how it goes. So I'm going to go over here and get set up with my example. That's not what I wanted. Let's see here. Okay. Okay, I'm going to make this full screen. And just as a reminder, everybody, if you click down here, you can get the preview of your code. And are people following along? Have people been able to open this? They have the screen up. And then, okay, great. And if you scroll down, you should click give me the answer, and you should get, there are 17 Skittles in the jar. So everybody should have this behavior. And also when I click start, I should get the console message, fill jar. So what we want to do is, instead of just logging out fill jar here, actually quickly, how is the text size on the screen? Is it okay? Do I need to zoom in a little more? Good, okay. All right, so down in fill jar, this is where we'll start off with today's Skittles exercise. So what we want to do at the very beginning here again is we just want to create and add one test Skittle. And to remind everybody what Skittles look like, if we go over into our HTML, these are divs with two classes, Skittle and the color of the Skittle. So I want to go ahead and create a new Skittle. Just quickly, I'm going to turn off my auto reload here because that annoys me a little bit. So now the first thing I want to do is create my new Skittle. I'm going to call this Skittle, and I'm going to say this equals, and then what function did we learn to create elements? Right, and that exists on the document object. And I'll pass in the string div. For those of you who haven't done the practice problems in the video, I will not, or practice problems in the ed lesson, I won't ruin one of the questions for you, but it's really important that you type the names of your elements correctly, because JavaScript will not, it's a silent error that occurs there. So make sure you type your element names correctly. And then we do have the gen function defined here for us, so we could use that. But real quick, let's just log out our Skittle to see what that looks like, to make sure that it is actually what we think it is. So let me reload this frame here. Let me click start. And then in the console here, you can see that I have my empty div element. It has no text content. It has no attributes. It is just an empty element. And then equivalently, we should have the gen function here, I believe. And if I go reload this page, hit start, I don't have gen defined in here. This is sad, sad life. So why don't we just go ahead and define that ourselves. So I'll just go ahead and do that here. Gen will take the tag name, and we'll do return document dot create element tag name. Now if I do this, reload the frame, and then hit start. Great. I now have defined the gen function there, so we can use this just a little bit cleaner. Okay, so now we have our Skittle. We want to add the classes Skittle and Green. We learned last time how we can add classes to elements dynamically. So here we just want to do Skittle dot, and what if somebody wants to help me here with this function? What do I want to call to add classes to my element? Class list, that's right. And then what is the function we add? Exactly. So I can add Skittle, right? And then I could do another call to skittle.classlist.add, or add and pass in green to do my second class. But this is actually one of the nice properties of the add function is I can pass in multiple class names and they'll get added to my element. So I can just do green right here in the same function. Let's go ahead and log this out to the console, hit start and see what we get. And we have exactly what we wanted here, which is a div with class Skittle and Green. Okay. Now, one of the other behaviors, there is a double click behavior on the Skittle that I meant to show you guys. But we won't worry about that for the moment, but we will go ahead and add an event listener to our Skittle. And as a callback, we will call the function eat Skittle, which we will add on later in this exercise. So if I want to add an event listener to my new element here, I can do what is skittle.add event listener, passing in double click. And I can do pass in the function name eat Skittle here. And down in eat Skittle, let's see what's there really quickly. There's nothing. I will just go ahead and add a console log so that when we do test it, we have something. So we'll come back and see if this worked. But first, before we can actually test to see if our double click functionality is working, we need to add our Skittle to the jar. And so this is where our new material comes in today. And so if we look over in skittles.html, what element do we want to append our Skittle to? Somebody could just, exactly, we want to get a reference to our Skittle jar, because this is going to be the parent element of our Skittle. This is the element that we want to append their new element to. So what I can do here is do ID jar. And then in this particular case, we just want to add it to the end of the container, the jar element. And so what of those functions that we saw on the slide can we use? Right, Appendchild will add it to the end of the container. This is what we want in this particular case. This is the intended behavior, but you can insert elements into different locations within a container using some of those other functions, like insert before, insert adjacent element, instead of Appendchild. So quickly, I will get to these questions, but let me just go ahead and append our Skittle and see what happens here. So I'll go ahead and reload this frame, and I will click Start. And you can see here that I have added a Skittle into the jar here, right? And then we had our double click event listener, which will call, just log to the console. So if I double click, you can see here I'm logging out eat Skittle every time I do a double click. So going back, Connor answered a question about what happens if you add a space between the two class names up here on line 40. So apparently Connor tested it and it throws an error here. So just for everyone's benefit, let's see if we did try to do this, what would happen. And so it doesn't want accept space characters for individual class names. So you have to separate your classes into separate strings and pass them as separate arguments into your class list add function. So let's put that back to how it was. Okay. Reload again, make sure that we get back to our expected behavior. And we do. Okay, great. And then next up we have, where did the new div go before we added it to the jar? So it exists in our JavaScript program, right? We have a reference to it. It is in memory for our program, but it's not actually inserted into the DOM, the actual DOM that is displayed on the page. It is completely separate from that. And as I mentioned earlier, if we were to use query selector or get element by ID or any of those other accessor functions, we wouldn't return that element until we added it into the page. Hopefully, Kellen, that answers your question, but let me know if it doesn't. Will the function currently only add a green skittle to the jar? Currently, yes, but we are going to fix that shortly. And then double-clicking only affects skittles we added to the jar. Correct. So this is a very good point. Because we, in this example, we wanted to start off with some skittles just to see, just to have something to count as the first part of this exercise. We don't have that double-click event listener on any of these other skittles. So if I click down here in some of these original ones, nothing happens. We only have the event listeners added to the new skittles that we have added ourselves. And in this case, since we're already getting into the process of adding our own skittles, why don't we just go over and why don't we just go ahead and delete all of our skittles that are here on page load. Let's just get rid of these. We're going to go ahead and we'll be adding our own here. I'm just going to delete these, go back over, reload my frame. And now I have no skittles, but if I hit start, I start adding them. And when I double click all of these ones, these all have the double click event listener added to it. Okay. So now, as was pointed out, at the moment, we're only adding green skittles, but what we would like to do is add a random color of skittle. And the random colors we're going to be choosing from are up here at the top in a what we're going to call a module global called colors. And this is an array of 3 colors for our skittles: red, green, and blue. And so, sorry guys, my mouse pad always takes me out of full screen mode. Sorry about that. I will try to avoid that as much as possible. I know that's jarring. Okay, so what I want to do is back over on my JavaScript file. I want to go and replace this green with a random color. And so what I want to do is have get random color. I want to call get random color here. And I want get random color to return one of the strings from that colors array. And so we can do this by accessing, getting a random index value for the colors array, and then accessing the color at that random index. So the first thing we need to do is get a random index. And we can get a random number in JavaScript by using math math.random. Math is another global that is just available to us in our JavaScript files. And random gives us a number between 0 and 1, inclusive of 0. If I want to get a number within the range of the, if I want to get a random index, I guess, of my colors array, what do I need to multiply math.random by? Hopefully that made sense there. It may not have. I'm seeing some good answers there. Colors.length, right? Okay. So I'll multiply this by colors.length. And so this is going to give us numbers between 0 and, in this case, 3. But as we know, arrays are indexed by starting at 0, right? So the numbers we actually want are 0, 1, or 2. Does everybody know of another math function we can use that would make this work for us? And I'm seeing floor. Casting to int, Alex, I think could also work if it rounds down automatically. It might. I'm not positive about that one, but I do know that math.floor will convert this into an integer, rounding down to the nearest integer. Okay. Right, and so now that we have our random index, why don't we go ahead and let's just log this to the console and see what our random index is. And this may throw an error because we're returning up here, instead of a color, a number, but we should still be able to log out. Actually, we're not returning a number at all yet. We're just returning undefined up for get random color. But let's see what this logs out here first. So let me reload the frame. Let me scroll down here. I'm so afraid I'm going to hit back on my mouse pad here. And let's hit start. And so here we get 0. And you'll notice here actually that if I pass the name undefined, that it will pass that in as a class name. So there's another error that could pass silently in your code to watch out for. But you see here I get 0. Let me keep hitting the start button, and you'll see that I get random numbers between 0 and 2. Some of the questions we got: why not math.random, colors.length? I'm not 100% sure. That may work. So it looks like I'm not sure what the actual argument does for math.random. I'm not 100% positive on that. I'll have to get back to you. But it looks like that particular method does not work. So we need to actually do math.random, get a number between 0 and 1, and multiply that by the length of our array. Nicholas asked, I thought everything JavaScript doesn't have ints. I thought everything was just a number. So you can, everything is dynamically cast, but under the hood, there is a concept of a integer or a float or a decimal. So if I just show you over here in the console, let me clear this. I can have a number, my float number equal 1.13. And that's fine, right? But then if I do math.floor on this, on float, you'll see I get back an actual int. There's no decimal 0.0 there. So under the hood, JavaScript does have a concept of these different types, but they're, as far as we're concerned, everything is dynamically typed, and we only use the let and const variable declarations. Evan is asking what we put into our gen function. That was just an alias for create element. I'll just scroll down here really quickly. So document return document.create element tag name, and tag name is one of the parameters. Okay, great. So again, when I hit start here, I get a random value between a random index between 0 and 2. And so now that I have my random index, how can I return, how do I get a color, first of all? What do I want to do to get a color from my colors array? What is the next step? Right, exactly. So I'm going to index my colors array using the random index that I got. And then I'm going to return my random color. Okay, and so hopefully back up here, that get random color will now return a random color for us. So if I reload the frame here and hit start, oh no. Oh, there we go. Wow, that was interesting. I got a lot of greens in a row there, but you can see I am actually adding random color Skittles, blue, green, and red to our jar. Okay, cool. So next, let's go ahead and go back into our double click functionality here. So what I want to happen when I double click on my new Skittle, instead of just calling eat Skittle, I actually want to remove it from this jar. So I want to, I added these, but now when I double click one, I want it to be removed from the DOM, removed from this container. So let's go down into our eat Skittle function here. And I want to access my Skittle here. That's the first thing I need to do. So quickly, there's a question, why should we add the parentheses, open and close parentheses after get random color, but not eat Skittle? So for everybody here, line 40, when we're adding our classes, I'm invoking get random color. But on line 44, when I'm passing the function eat Skittle, I'm not invoking it. I am just passing the name. So the difference here is that on line 40, I actually want to pass in a color or a string to class list.add. So I want to invoke the function immediately so that I get a string to pass in to my add function. On line 44, eat Skittle is the function that I want to pass in. I don't want the value of eat Skittle to pass into add event listener. I just want the function itself, so I don't need to invoke it. I just need to pass the name of it there. That's a good question and is definitely really confusing, but I'm glad you asked it. And then can you say that you add, if you invoke the function, can you say that you add a open close if the function returns something? Tara, can you clarify a little bit? Not sure I understand that question fully, but we can come back if you add a little more to that. Okay, so going back over here to eat Skittle, when I double click a Skittle, I want to remove it from the DOM. I want to remove it from this container. And so from previous videos, we saw a couple of different ways of how we can access the item or the DOM element that has just been clicked. Can somebody suggest a way for us to access the Skittle that was just clicked? Okay. All right, I'm seeing people jumping way ahead here. It's great. So I'm seeing this and also the event object. Okay, great. So we can use this. Go ahead and log out our skill to the console like I've been doing. And actually, let me go and comment out some of these other console logs so we don't see them. Okay, and so now if I hit start here and I double click this, you see here in the console, I actually get the Skittle that I just clicked. And I can show you that this is true here. So if I do this blue one, double click it, and I go into the console and I hover over it, it actually highlights that Skittle that I just clicked for you. Now, another way that was mentioned for accessing the Skittle that was just clicked is by using the event object that was mentioned. So if I want to use the event object in my callback function, what do I need to do that I haven't currently done? Right. So I need to define a parameter here that represents my event object. So as we know, the browser automatically creates an event object when an event occurs, and it passes in when it calls or invokes our callback function that we added with add event listener. It passes in the event object, so we can actually access that in our callback by defining the parameter. We can just call it E, which is a pretty common way of referencing our event. And then what on the event object do I want to reference? To get the current Skittle that was clicked. Right, so we want to do current target here. And I'll show if we reload the page and hit start, and I double click this, we get the exact same outcome. So in this particular case, either way works. We'll see on Friday some instances where this may not be the element that the event listener was attached to. So there are some considerations for when you're using the this keyword, but we'll dig into that on Friday's lecture. Okay, so now once we have our Skittle here, we want to actually remove it from the jar. And I already saw one method somebody posted, but can I get the other method of removing this Skittle? So remove, that's one way. So I can definitely do that. I'm seeing jar remove child Skittle. That is another way. So let's just see this quickly. I have Skittle.remove. Add a few, double click. That Skittle goes away. That Skittle goes away. I can also do id jar dot remove child, passing in my Skittle. Okay. And that works just as well. How can I do this without using an accessor function like getElementById? What is another way for me to reference the jar without using getElementById or query selector? Right. So I'm seeing parent node, parent element. In this case, I could use either the parent node or the parent element. So what I'll do is I can do skittle.parent element dot remove child passing in skittle. Reload the frame here, hit start again, and I can remove this. And there was a question in here about that Justin asked, if you remove it from the DOM, does it also remove the event listeners attached to it? This is a good question. Let's go ahead and give that a shot. So I've currently removed the skittle. And so let me just go ahead and add it back in. I'll have to reference the jar this time. And I'll append back immediately after removing it. I'll append it back to the jar. And let's see what happens here. Oh my gosh, okay. Okay, let me hit start here and let me double click. And you can see that actually my event listeners are still attached. I'm still calling console log, even if I remove it and immediately add it back again. Okay, let me just make sure I've hit all the questions here. Okie dokie. All right, the next step, we may not have enough time to do all this, but we'll get started. So I actually want to have my fill jar function, which we're calling when we click start. I want it to fill the jar not just with one skittle. I want it to fill with a random number of skittles, let's say between 0 and 100. So the first thing I want to do is kind of want to clean up my code a little bit from fill jar. I have a separate function called add skittle where I'm going to take the functions or the functionality that I added to create a skittle from fill jar, and I'm going to put them down here in add skittle just so we have that nice and more modular here. And so I'll just go ahead and copy this code here. I'll cut that out. I'll go down to my add skittle, and I'll paste this in here. And then back up and fill jar for the time being. We can call a singular add skittle. Okay, and then if I reload my page here, I'm having trouble doing this apparently. If I hit start, I still add singular skittles. Okay, now when I click start and call fill jar, I actually want to add a random number of skittles between 0 and 100. So just like we did to get a random number for the index for our colors, we're going to create a random integer between 0 and 100 for the number of skittles that we want to add to this page. So in this case, I'm going to do random number equals math.floor, math.random, multiply this. I need to actually invoke random, multiply by 100, and do the floor here. But I'm missing something from my random number. My random numbers here is actually going to include 0 if I leave it as it is currently. And the reason for this is that math.random is inclusive of 0 but not of 1. So it is possible for math.random to return 0. And then math.floor would return 0, and then I would end up creating no skittles, which we don't want. So what I want to do here to prevent that is just add 1, which is what Ahmed said. Okay, so now we have a random number. What do we want to do? So we want to do, yeah, exactly. We can just do a for loop here. And we'll call add skittle in our loop here. I'll go ahead and reload this page. And now if I hit start, you'll see every time I hit start, I add a random number of skittles with one of the 3 colors that was chosen randomly. But you'll see here, I am quickly overflowing with skittles every time I click start, and we have exited the jar, and now it looks like the page. So how do I fix this? What do I want to do to make sure every time I click start so I don't overfill? Perhaps I should empty the jar of all the skittles. So we could make another empty jar method. So since it was suggested, why not? And then to empty the jar, what do I want to do? How would I get rid of all of the skittles in my jar? Okay, so I'm seeing remove child, make the jar null. Okay, so let's start with let's try the removing all the children from the jar. So how do I get my children, all of the skittles that are currently in the jar? Okay, we could do jar.children. Okay. Let's do that. There's going to be a little bit of an issue here, but we will address it. So I'll let my skittles equal id jar.children. And then what can I do with these children? What do I want to, how do I want to remove them? What is the method now that I have access to these children? What do I want to do to remove them? We could use a while loop. Okay, so let's try the while loop. So while skittles dot, let's do length is what? Greater than 0? We can do greater than 0. Okay. And so then what do I want to do here? I want to skittles what? What is the function I want to call here? Skittles 0, access the first one, and then just do remove. And now let's just call empty jar here at the top of our fill function. And so let's reload this. And you can see that this works. Another thing we could have done that might make this a little bit easier is that we can actually set the inner HTML of our jar to be an empty string. And so we can do and this will actually have the exact same effect. And this is one of the only cases in this class where it is okay to use inner HTML. If we ever want to set text on an element, we use text content. But if we want to completely empty out one of our containers, one of our HTML elements, we can set the inner HTML to an empty string, and that will completely remove all of the children elements in that element, and also all of the everything inside there, basically all of the children's children, the entire contents of that element will be emptied out. So that's actually all for today. We are over time. So I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording. But I'm going to stay around here and answer some of these questions. For everyone else, I will see you in lecture on Friday or in office hours. Both Fitz and I have office hours right after lecture today.